The three riders stopped so close to the porch that dust rolled up the steps like smoke. Verity Sloane did not rise from the chair. She kept the shotgun across her knees and her face turned hard toward the yard, though her hands were damp against the worn walnut stock. To the men below, she looked like a ranch widow defending what little was left of her life. To the man standing beside her, she looked like someone balancing on the last board before a long fall. Boone Kester sat heavy in the saddle, one gloved hand resting near his revolver. He smiled as if he had come to borrow sugar. "You got one last chance, Miss Sloane," he called. "Sell Juniper Wells and take the money. Or send that stray of yours packing, and let decent men handle what comes next." Verity felt the words strike Thaddeus Vale before he moved at all. He stood on the edge of the porch with an axe in his hand, loose and quiet, the way a man stands when he has already counted how many steps it will take to reach trouble. He had ridden onto her land 12 weeks earlier asking for work and a meal. Now 3 armed men had come because of him, because of her, because of a bargain neither of them had ever meant to become real. The worst part was this: she no longer knew whether it was a bargain at all. Boone looked from Verity to the broad-shouldered drifter beside her and laughed once. "You hear me, Vale. A woman in trouble'll say most anything when winter's coming. Don't mistake desperation for vows." Thaddeus did not glance at Verity. "You finished?" "Not near." Boone reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper. "This here says the Platte Valley Land and Cattle Company is prepared to pay for peaceful cooperation. You can still walk away with a train ticket, a month's wages, and all your teeth." Verity's stomach turned cold. She knew before Boone spoke again what he meant to do. He wanted to crack the ranch open at its weakest seam. He wanted to find out whether the man she had married in front of a preacher would stand like a husband when things turned ugly, or vanish like every other passing mercy life had offered her. She looked at Thaddeus then. If he stepped aside, she would lose the ranch by winter. If he stayed, he might lose far more than that. And when Boone Kester spat in the dirt and said, "Tell us the truth, widow. Did you buy yourself a husband or just rent one?" The whole world seemed to narrow to the silence before Thaddeus answered. 3 months earlier, Verity Sloane had been standing on the same porch with nothing in her future but debt, hunger, and men who smiled too easily at a widow's land. Juniper Wells Ranch lay high in the Crow's Tooth Range, where the wind came down mean off the stone and never asked forgiveness. It was not much by the standards of the cattle barons east of Bracken Crossing, but it had one thing men killed for and called it business after: water. A cold spring ran out from the black rock above the cottonwoods and fed her stock through dry months when neighboring creeks turned to cracked ribbon and dust. Her husband Amos had known that. It was why he had staked the place 6 years earlier, back when his laugh was easy and his shoulders still bent toward the future. Then the Iron Lantern mine took him in one dark shift and sent word back with a foreman who would not meet her eyes. Since then, Verity had worked the place with raw hands and stubborn pride, paying what bills she could, patching what fences she must, learning exactly how long a woman could carry a ranch alone before the whole country smelled weakness. By the autumn of 1887, she had her answer. Not long. First came the letters from the Platte Valley Land and Cattle Company, polite as undertakers. Then came the offers, then the warnings disguised as advice. A woman alone, they said, ought to think carefully about her safety. A woman alone, they said, could not possibly hold title forever against men with lawyers, riders, and cash enough to stretch a court's conscience. She burned the first letter. She burned the second. She read the third 3 times because the threat beneath the courtesy had grown so plain, even the fire seemed to hesitate before taking it. When Thaddeus Vale rode into her yard that afternoon, she was already standing inside the last corner of her choices. He came on a tired bay gelding with a bedroll, a canteen, and the look of a man who had gone too many miles without hearing his own name spoken kindly. His hat was sweat-stained. His shirt was mended at the shoulder. He dismounted slow, as if he had learned long ago not to startle either horses or strangers. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat, "I heard in Bracken Crossing you might be needing a hand." Verity studied him without stepping aside. Too lean for a bully, too worn for a thief who had prospered. His hands told the truth faster than his face did. Rope burns, scars, knuckles gone broad with labor. Whatever he was, he had worked for it. "I need one," she said, "but I can't pay fair." He nodded once, unsurprised. "I ain't hunting fair, just honest." Something in that answer broke loose inside her. Perhaps it was the hunger in his eyes, matched too closely to the fear she had hidden in her own. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the sound of the wind in the cottonwoods telling her she had run out of time for shame. "I don't need a ranch hand as badly as I need a husband," she said. He did not move. The gelding flicked an ear. Somewhere out back, one of the hens began a foolish complaint. But the man before her stood still as fence-post timber, his hat in one hand, his expression emptied clean of everything but disbelief. "I beg your pardon." She felt color rise in her face and hated herself for it, so she lifted her chin instead. "You heard me. I need a name on this place that isn't easy prey. The company men are circling. A woman alone is a loose board to them. A husband makes the board harder to pry up." His gaze sharpened. "You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking whether you'd rather sleep under a roof than under the sky. I'm asking whether you can work a ranch and keep your word. I'm asking whether you'd tie your future to mine long enough to save us both." He searched her face for mockery and found none. "It wouldn't be a real marriage," she said quickly, hearing how desperate that sounded and unable to stop. "You'd have your own room, your own say in the work, half share in what we build if we hold it. No promises beyond decency." He looked past her toward the corrals, the sagging fence line, the barn roof that needed patching before first snow. Then back at her, "And if I say no, then I feed you supper if I have enough to spare, and by morning we both go back to losing separately." It was the plainest truth she had spoken in months. Thaddeus lowered his eyes to the porch boards, and for a moment Verity thought she had done it, shamed herself past repair before a stranger who would carry the story straight back to town. But when he looked up again, the flint in his face had softened into something sadder. "How long since your husband died?" 3 years. "And no kin? None close enough to come?" He gave a slow breath. "I've been walking so long, I hardly remember what it feels like to belong to a place." "Then maybe don't think of it as belonging," she said. "Think of it as standing your ground for once." That made him almost smile. It was the smallest thing, barely there, but it changed the air between them. "All right," he said. She stared at him. "All right. I'll do it. Just like that." He slid his hat back on. "No, not just like that. There's nothing just about it. But a man knows a cliff when he's at one. You're at yours. Looks like I'm at mine." He said it so quietly it stole the breath from her. The next morning they rode to Bracken Crossing in a wagon that rattled over the washboard road and announced their misery to half the county. Verity felt every eye turn toward them before they even stopped at the church. Bracken Crossing was the sort of town that could forgive sin quicker than it could forgive surprise, and there was nothing folks hated more than finding out life had happened somewhere without their permission. Reverend Obadiah Flint met them in the vestibule with a mouth so thin it could have sliced thread. "You've known each other how long?" he asked. "1 day," Verity said. Thaddeus stood beside her, still and unreadable. The Reverend removed his spectacles, polished them, and put them back on as if a cleaner lens might improve the situation. "Marriage is a covenant, not a patch for legal trouble." Verity held his gaze. "Then preach the covenant after you witness the need." For a heartbeat she thought he would refuse. Then Thaddeus stepped closer and said, "I'm here of my own will, Reverend." That changed it. Maybe the preacher heard steadiness where he had expected opportunism. Maybe even a stern man could see the fear in a widow's shoulders and the strange dignity in a drifter who did not retreat from it. Whatever the reason, he married them before noon with 2 churchwomen as witnesses and God, if he was watching, saying nothing at all. The ride home was worse than the ride in, not because either of them regretted it, because they had done something that could not be undone, and now every silence felt newly alive. Verity sat stiff in the wagon seat, aware of the man beside her in ways that made no sense. He was not touching her. He was not crowding her. Yet the fact of him had entered the whole shape of her life. One sentence in a church had taken her empty table, her quiet nights, her widow's chores, and put another heartbeat inside them. She had not been lonely until then. That was the cruelest part. By the time they reached Juniper Wells, the sky had turned copper. Thaddeus carried his bedroll inside, paused by the parlor doorway and said, "I can still sleep in the barn if that makes it easier." "Don't be absurd." He gave the room a slow look. "You sure?" "No," she said, and the honesty of it made them both stop. Then she set down the lamp and tried again. "No, but easier isn't what got us here." He nodded once. "Fair enough." They fell into a rhythm because work does not ask what name a thing has before it uses it. At dawn, he mended fence. Therefore the calves stopped wandering. But the pump cracked on the north side, so they lost a day to iron and cursing. He repaired the barn roof. Therefore the first hard rain did not soak the grain. But one of the mares went lame, so Verity rode bareback through sleet to fetch the farrier from town. Each solved trouble made room for the next, yet underneath all of it the ranch began, almost against its will, to look less like a place waiting to die. So did she. Thaddeus spoke little about the years before he reached her gate. In pieces, when the work or the dark loosened him, she learned enough. Missouri boy, family gone in the war. Too many seasons drifting from one outfit to another, never staying long enough for roots to catch. He carried no photograph, no letter, no keepsake but a pocket knife with a worn bone handle and a scar over his ribs he refused to explain. Verity did not press. She had her own silences. At night they ate across from one another at the table Amos had built. The first evenings were stiff, full of careful manners and glances that broke apart whenever they met. But hunger is a plain force, and so is weather, and neither makes room for endless awkwardness. Soon he was telling her which fence posts would have to be replaced come spring. She was telling him which cow would kick if he stood on her left. He laughed once when her biscuits went hard enough to patch a road. She laughed back before she remembered she had almost forgotten how. That frightened her more than the company did, because the company was easy to hate. What frightened her was hope. It arrived in small, dangerous ways. In finding his coffee cup set out beside hers before dawn. In hearing his boots on the porch after nightfall and knowing, without looking, that he had come back from the lower pasture. In watching him lift a feed sack as if strain were just another language he had stopped bothering to translate. Then Sunday came, and Bracken Crossing reminded them that private bargains never stay private long. The church went quiet when Verity and Thaddeus stepped through the door. Not fully quiet, more like a pond going still after a thrown stone sinks. Heads turned, whispers moved. Reverend Flint looked as if he had asked heaven for patience and been sent a test instead. Verity took a pew near the back. Thaddeus sat beside her, hat in his lap, shoulders squared. She could feel every eye scraping over them, measuring the distance between them, hunting signs of fraud, lust, desperation, scandal. Anything easier for townfolk to understand than courage done in plain sight. Halfway through the sermon, a woman in front turned and stared outright. Verity fixed her gaze on the pulpit and kept breathing. Then the whisper came from somewhere behind them, not even soft enough to count as manners. A widow that quick. Shameful. Her spine locked. Before she could decide whether to rise and leave, she felt warmth at her side. Thaddeus had turned his hand palm up on the pew between them. He did not look at her. He did not make a show of it. He simply offered his hand where anyone could see. Verity stared at it. Then she placed hers in his. A stir moved through the church like dry grass catching wind. Let them look. His grip was steady, not possessive, not theatrical. Just present. It said what her pride had been too battered to ask for. You do not stand alone while I'm here." After service, a widow named Dinah Bell caught Verity near the steps and pressed a sack of yeast into her hands. "Pay me when the cows start spitting out silver dollars," Dinah said. "Till then, let the hens carry part of the burden." It was such a crooked way of offering kindness that Verity nearly cried on the spot. But kindness in Bracken Crossing had enemies. Lucian Rusk arrived 2 days later in a black coat too fine for ranch roads and boots that had never once been introduced to honest mud. He came with papers, a courteous smile, and the deadly patience of men who win by waiting for hunger to do their work. "Mrs. Vale," he said, glancing at the ring on her hand with a lawyer's suspicion, "or do you prefer Mrs. Sloane still?" "My preference ain't your concern." He smiled wider. "Good, we understand each other." Thaddeus stood by the hitch rail, saying nothing. Lucian unfolded his papers. "The Platte Valley Company is prepared to make a final offer for Juniper Wells. Generous terms, enough to settle your debts and establish you comfortably in town, perhaps even farther east, where life asks less of a woman." Verity felt the old fury sharpen inside her. "Juniper Wells isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale." "Not this." Lucian tilted his head. "Your title may not prove as sturdy as you think. Claims become complicated. Residency conditions, improvements, surviving spouse provisions. The courts can be tiresome places for those without ready cash." "She has a husband," Thaddeus said. Lucian's gaze slid to him at last. "Does she?" The yard went still. Lucian tapped the papers against his glove. Men have been known to sign themselves into all sorts of arrangements when the price is right. "There was no price," Verity said. "That," Lucian answered softly, "is exactly what makes the town doubt it." He left the papers on the porch and rode away with his smile still on his face. That night Verity fed the stove until the kitchen turned red with heat. She did not touch the food she had made. "It'll get worse now," she said. Thaddeus leaned in the doorway, arms folded. "Likely. You can still take your horse and go. And have them gut the place by Christmas." "I mean it. So do I." She faced him. "Why?" He took longer answering than the question should have required. "Because a man gets tired of leaving every hard thing the minute it starts to matter." The words reached somewhere in her she had boarded up. She looked away first. 3 days later Boone Kester rode in with 2 men and a bottle in his saddlebag. They did not bother with papers. Men like Boone handled the part of business done after politeness failed. He called from the yard for Thaddeus to come down like men. Verity reached for the shotgun before she knew she was doing it. Thaddeus stopped her with one look. "Not yet." He took the axe instead. The men laughed when they saw it. Boone asked if chopping wood was all a May-lorder husband was good for. One of the riders offered $5 for the ring on Verity's finger. Another asked what her next bargain would cost when winter stripped the place bare. Thaddeus said nothing until Boone dismounted and planted a boot on the first porch step. Then he moved, fast, not wild, just fast enough to make Boone understand the distance between insult and consequence. The axe head bit into the post beside Boone's shoulder with a crack like pistol fire. Wood split. Boone jumped back cursing. Thaddeus stepped down one stair and at last spoke. "You come onto this land again, threatening my wife. You best come ready to bury whatever part of yourself you leave behind." No shouting, no chest thumping, that was what made it frightening. Boone saw it too. For the first time his swagger thinned. He backed away with a snarl and gathered his men, but not before throwing one last poison barb into the yard. "She ain't your wife," he said. "She's a roof with a pulse." Verity watched the words hit Thaddeus like a hidden stone. Boone rode off grinning because he knew where he had aimed. That night neither of them slept much. Sometime after midnight, Verity stepped onto the porch in her shawl and found Thaddeus sitting in the dark with his elbows on his knees. "I should have hit him," he said. "No, you did worse, you scared him." He shook his head. He wasn't wrong to think it. She stood beside the railing. "And what do you think?" The question hung there between them, too large to rush. At last he said, "I think I came here for a roof. I think that was true the first minute and not true anymore. Her heartbeat stumbled. But I don't know what right I have to anything more than what we agreed. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere a horse stamped in the barn. Verity said very quietly, "Neither do I." It was not a confession. Not yet. But it opened a door both of them had been pretending not to see. Winter came hard over the Crow's Tooth Range. Therefore the company's riders stopped visiting so often. But snow did what men could not. It trapped people close to their own hearts. Days narrowed to chores, firelight, and the sound of weather testing every board in the house. In that white silence, they learned each other too well for pretense to survive. The way he rubbed the scar at his ribs when old memories climbed on him. The way she went still whenever anyone mentioned the mine. The way both of them watched the window when the other rode out alone. Then one evening, with the storm sky hanging low and purple, Verity found a note tucked under the stable door. "Come to Bracken Crossing alone if you want the debt ledger settled. Last chance before court seizure." No signature. It did not need one. She showed it to Thaddeus expecting anger. What she saw instead was fear. "It's bait. I know. You're not going. They've got my debt held by the mercantile and the bank. If there's a chance." "There is." She met his gaze. "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit here till men with stamps and smiles strip the walls around us?" He stepped closer than he had any right to without touching her. "You trust me?" The question was so sudden she answered before caution could rise. "Yes." "Then don't go." She obeyed him. At dawn they learned why he had asked. Sheriff's deputy from town rode up half-frozen to say Lucian Rusk had been found drunk in his office, insisting a widow from Juniper Wells had threatened him in the night. Several townsmen swore they had seen no such thing. Boone Kester, however, was eager to testify otherwise. It had been a trap from the start. If Verity had gone, they would have painted her wild, unstable, unfit to hold a claim. She sat down hard on the porch bench when the deputy rode away. Thaddeus crouched in front of her. "You all right?" "No." She laughed once, bitter and shaken. "But I'm beginning to see what sort of men we're fighting." "Then let's make them fight in daylight." He rode to Bracken Crossing that same afternoon with every receipt, tax slip, and claim paper they had. Reverend Flint, of all men, helped him copy the records. Dinah Bell brought names of 2 witnesses who remembered Amos filing improvements by hand the first year. Even Sheriff Harlan Pike, who preferred not to climb into other men's storms, admitted Boone Kester's company had been pressing too hard and too often for something lawful. For the first time the ground shifted, but not enough, because before the hearing could be held the blizzard came. It struck at dusk with a violence that erased the road, the fence line, and nearly the barn in one white swallowing breath. Thaddeus and Verity fought drifts for an hour just to get the stock secured. He had barely latched the final stall when he saw the horse stumbling at the edge of the yard. A black horse, nearly down. And slumped across it half-conscious was Lucian Rusk. Verity stared. No. Lucian slid from the saddle into the snow. There are moments that decide what sort of person you are, and the hateful thing is how little warning they give. Verity had dreamed often enough of seeing that man broken by forces greater than his paper threats. Yet when she looked at him face down in the drift, fingers blue with cold, all she saw was a human creature 1 breath from dying at her gate. "Leave him," she said, and hated the weakness in her voice because she wanted Thaddeus to disobey. He looked at her once. Then he bent and hauled Lucian upright. Together they dragged him inside. Lucian burned with fever through the night while the storm hammered the ranch like judgment. Twice he woke raving about water rights, signatures, men in Denver, directors who wanted quick consolidation before spring. Once in the blind heat of it, he gripped Verity's sleeve and whispered, "I didn't know they meant to ruin you that thoroughly." By morning his pride had returned, but something else had cracked. He sat at her table wrapped in one of Thaddeus's blankets, staring at the coffee in front of him as if it accused him. "You should have let me freeze," he said. "Verity was too tired for drama. Wouldn't have improved my morning." Lucian looked from her to Thaddeus, and then down at his own hands. Boone's gone farther than he was instructed. That surprises me none, Thaddeus said. It should surprise you less that the company encouraged it. Silence settled. Then Lucian reached into his coat and drew out a packet, damp but intact. These are copies of your dead assignments, Mrs. Sloane, Mrs. Vale, whatever name you mean to keep. He swallowed. And the internal order to challenge your claim regardless of legal standing. I was meant to deliver them to Cheyenne after the storm. I won't be doing that. Verity did not move. Why? He gave a tired, ruined smile. Because I have spent 15 years confusing power with safety, and I am suddenly ashamed of the education. When the roads cleared, Lucian Rusk resigned from the Platte Valley Company, submitted his statement to the territorial clerk, and named Boone Kester as the man sent to frighten a lawful claimant from her land. Boone fled before the warrant could reach him. The company, faced with public embarrassment and more scrutiny than profit, backed away from Juniper Wells like a gambler pretending he had meant to fold all along. By spring, the ranch was safe, and that was when the real trouble began, because danger had been easier than peace. For weeks after the threat passed, Thaddeus worked harder than ever, as if motion alone might solve what words could not. He fixed the west fence, broke a fresh patch of ground, repaired the wagon tongue. Therefore the place grew stronger. But each improvement seemed to push him farther from her, as though now that his promise had been fulfilled, he must prepare himself to vanish. Verity understood before he said anything. Men like him had learned to leave before wanting became need. She found the packed valise by the door on a mild morning in April. The cottonwoods were just beginning to green. Light pooled warm across the porch boards. It looked like a morning built for beginnings, which was why the sight of that bag made something in her chest go cold. He came in from the barn, saw where she was looking, and stopped. "So it's true," she said, his jaw tightened. "I figured it was time." "Time for what?" "For you to have your house back, your name back, a clean story to tell." She almost laughed at the stupidity of men when they were trying to be noble. "You think that's what I want? I think the bargain's done." There it was, that word. Bargain. As if the winter had not happened. As if the church, the porch, the nights by the stove, the trust, the fear, the way her body could find his presence in a room before her eyes did, as if all of it could be folded up like a contract and set aside. He lifted the bag. Verity. No. He went still. She stepped closer, the anger in her carrying more truth than gentleness ever had. "You do not get to stand in my yard, bleed for my land, make this place breathe again, and then tell me what story I ought to prefer." His face changed, not much, just enough. "I never meant to presume, and I never meant to fall in love with a man I married for survival." The words landed between them like struck fire. Neither moved. She felt suddenly bare, more exposed than on the day she had asked him for his name. There was no bargain to hide behind now, no emergency, no company men, no law. Just the plain, terrifying fact of one heart handed over without guarantee. At last Thaddeus set the bag down. "I kept waiting for the right time to tell you," he said, his voice rough. "But every time the road opened up, I hated it more." Verity could not breathe. He took one step nearer. "I have been leaving places my whole life before they could prove I was worth keeping. I thought that if I stayed here after the danger passed, it would look like I had trapped myself into more than I was offered." Her eyes stung. "You fool." A broken laugh escaped him. "That's fair." She looked at the bag on the floor, then back at him. "Do you want to go?" He answered at once, "No." The word hit her like sunlight through a storm break. "Then don't." That was all. No speeches, no grand display, just the truth at last stripped of fear. He reached for her as if giving her time to turn away. She did not. When his hands found her waist, the whole long winter seemed to melt out of her bones. She rose into him, and he kissed her with the care of a man touching water after years in the desert, then with the certainty of someone who had finally stopped wandering. Outside, the wind moved through the new leaves. Inside, the house did not feel borrowed anymore. 3 Sundays later, They stood again before Reverend Flint, who appeared deeply offended to discover that happiness had come of the arrangement he had once mistrusted. Dinah Bell cried openly. Sheriff Pike coughed into his hand and claimed dust in the church. Half of Bracken Crossing came because townspeople love a second ceremony almost as much as they love a first scandal. This time when Verity said her vows, there was no bargain under them. And when Thaddeus said his voice did not shake. Years later, folks in Bracken Crossing would tell the story wrong in a dozen entertaining ways. Some swore she had trapped a drifter. Some swore he had rescued a widow. Some swore the whole thing turned because of a blizzard and a conscience too late to save itself. But the truth was simpler and stronger. A woman on the edge of ruin had chosen courage over pride. A man who had lived like a ghost had chosen to stay. And because each had done the harder thing first, the rest of their life had somewhere solid to begin.